one. All right, I need to pull LinkedIn off of our but I think we're live and welcome. Let's see.
Cool.
I think we are ready to go, and welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us. This is Evo Heyning.
Hey, and I'm Michelle Excell. Hi. Should have put my whole name there. That would have been helpful.
Yeah, well, you know what? We've got a banner for that. So this is Michelle Excell, and I want you to just tell us a little bit about what you do, Michelle, and then we're going to dive into a conversation about virtual events together.
Yeah, great. Thank you for having me on. I've watched a few of these, but never been on, so this is really cool. So I run a company called the Antipodean. The Antipodean, we do consulting for immersive technology and production as well. So what that means is if a brand or an agency wants to get into doing AR or VR or any number of immersive technologies, help them really navigate that landscape and figure out what's out there, what people are actually gravitating towards, like spotting some trends. And a lot of that's what you're going to talk today about, Evo, and what people are actually using and what it's good for, and then helping them take their first steps. So I represent a couple of production companies, a few different production companies. The Electric Factory out of Uruguay, Current Studios is out of New York and Canada, and Vision are out of Spain. And each of them have specialties. Like Current is just augmented reality, OG. So been doing it for a million years. Vision is virtual reality OG and does a lot of events and things as well. They're doing a huge one right now for a big car company in Europe, like a $1 million live event thing over a few days right now, like as we speak, which is pretty cool. And Electric Factory do digital and IoT prototyping, which is super fun. So yeah, we don't need to go into this.
That's okay, but it sounds like you do a mix of the early stage strategy similar to what I do, and then helping match the use case to different types of technologies or platforms like Spark AR here in terms of being able to do either AR campaigns or in some cases VR campaigns and VR events as well. It sounds like you've been across the gamut. How did you get into this field, Michelle?
Well, I actually ran digital production in digital agencies and then advertising agencies for a really long time. So I got into digital in 2002. When we were still making interactive CD-ROMs for some of our clients. Granted, this was New Zealand, so we took a few years to catch up with everybody else, mostly in terms of connectivity. And then I just stuck with it. So when you start off in the early days of digital, trying to figure out how to do interactive CD-ROMs or touchscreen kiosks, and then moving into interactive websites. You live and breathe immersive technology, because a lot of what's happening now is stuff that we were trying to do back then with the limited tools that we had, or hoping we could do, wishing we could do. So it was really a pretty natural progression. Yeah.
It sounds like, so you and I came together around this desire to do more interesting immersive experiences that are both meaningful and generative, but are also, maybe taking a narrative forward in terms of participation or agency of the participants in a new way. And it sounds like you've done some really interesting design work. I'm curious how you developed your process to help shepherd these types of initiatives from the beginning all the way through to production.
Yeah, so it's actually really funny. The how I approach it is to go as non-technical as possible. I talk about it a lot that, when I did a lot of digital work, it was a lot of building big .coms or building startups, actual platforms, and then got into brand marketing, which is, of course, like more little blip campaigns, things that just pop up and then get thrown away, which is a little bit sad. And all of that process really starts with pen and paper. So what I do when I take new clients through the potential of this new technology is we have a look at what's possible. But for an example would be augmented reality and geolocation. So Not saying necessarily explaining how like cloud anchors and things like that work, but more saying, here are some use cases of how people have used it in the past. Here are some of the things you can do. You could leave a message in a certain spot for somebody. You could do recognition in a certain area so that the augmented reality experience knows where you are. So it's about giving case studies to people and opening up their minds about what is actually possible in a non-technical way. Like if I start any consulting like project by explaining the difference between like AR Core and AR Kit and, all of those different things, I'm going to lose people. So what I do instead is go in and say, hey, here's augmented reality in recognition. Here's augmented reality in placemaking. Here's augmented reality in geolocation. And just really expand people's minds about what's possible. And also then get them to like forget what's possible. So I want them to go nuts. I want people to say, in a magic universe, if this was possible, this is what I would want to do. Because that's really where the magic is. If they have a great idea, screw physics, screw what's technically possible. If it's a good idea because it's a really good interaction, then we can find a way to make that happen. Yeah.
That makes sense. So we come together around this concept of how to do better virtual interactive events. And that includes both VR and the more sort of 2D, whether that's immersive or interactive events. And so I'm curious what types of questions you're seeing most in terms of designing for new types of engagement. And then maybe we can take apart some of those questions together and answer it for the entire field and our audience today.
I would love that so much, because there are a lot of questions that come up and I sort of have, standard answers to them, but they're things that I think we need to discuss as an industry. And they're valid questions. So it used to be, VR is just too expensive, right? It used to just be, and who has headsets? And I think, I love that you laugh at that, because I still get that now. And I'm like, that's actually a really bad question, because it's not about who has headsets. It's about how we reach people with the experience. And so it's not just about critical mass. It really is about why you would be doing this. And if it's a better idea to do something in VR, you get someone a headset, right? That's just what you do, because that's what you need to do to get a better experience. So one of the big questions I have is, does it have to be all or nothing? And I think a lot of people think, from that, VR is expensive. And if we're going to do something in VR, it's going to be $1 million project. And so one of the questions I get now is it accessible? And I think it is. I'd love to hear what you think about that. But also, which sort of activities lend themselves to being in VR? Because I'm not a believer in just, hey, we used to do it this way physically, so, can we just do the exact same thing virtually? That's kind of a dumb way of looking at it. I think it's more, what should we do virtually? So maybe we used to have this event, but what kind of activities really work in VR and are better?
So let's pull that question apart just a little bit. So if you are thinking of the top use cases where VR makes sense more than any other type of virtual experience, where do you sort of rise those to the top of the list? What are the types of collaboration that make most sense in VR?
For me, it is exactly what you just said, collaboration. I think it's when you're actually getting people to do shared activities together. I think multiplayer VR just makes the most sense in the world. And so, and it saved us a lot of time, money, and wasted materials. And I think that there's superpowers we can give people in VR in terms of collaboration that they just cannot do in the real world. So I'm what people call a visual person, but I'm also terrible at expressing what I mean visually. So I use a lot of hand gestures. I use a lot of really bad drawings and a lot of walking around a room to explain to somebody how I want an interaction to be. And VR gives me those superpowers. I'm now able to draw something in front of somebody using, Sculptor VR or even Tilt Brush, and just share my screen. And I really think that collaboration is a big one.
Right. So There is the arts side, there is the design side, there is the sciences in terms of collaboration in medical or in other forms of sciences. There's educational collaboration. And then there's general meetings, right? So the tool that's up here right now, for example, Iris, is extremely useful for engineers and architects because it's collaborative, what we call a multiplayer or a multi-user experience, and that their group can come together around the blueprints. And if you need to do detailed architectural collaboration remotely right now, there's only 3 or 4 tools that are going to work for you. There's Iris, there's the Wild, which we could take a look at as well. But depending on the type of collaboration, there might be a specific type of platform that serves the need, whether that's bringing in 3D drawings in terms of architecture and being able to work with professional data sets and use cases. In medical, I don't know how much you've done in the medical space. It sounds like a lot of the people who are coming to you are brands and companies that are looking to do collaboration, but maybe are more general in the way they approach it. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think that's right. So there's 2 sides to that. One is I think that there's a lack of understanding about what consumers are actually doing and what they're willing to do. And that's when somebody has a VR headset or not. I think we understand now that people just gaming, and that gaming has become far more mainstream now with the advent of mobile gaming and other consoles that are just a lot more accessible, and gaming content that's a lot more accessible. So I think that sometimes it's hard for me to explain that a consumer for a particular brand may actually do this. I think that brands maybe have a misconception that we're making people jump through too many hoops, or that it might be a bit too much of an ask to get somebody to either don a headset or do something interactive online. And so I have to really point to existing user behavior to say, well, no, hang on a second. If the value is actually there, if the payoff is actually there, if the enjoyment is there, people are absolutely going to do this, because they are not jumping through hoops to play games, but they're doing some pretty extensive interactive and immersive behavior and actions already. Right. And then the other side to that is I think it's really beneficial for my agencies and brands, my clients, to actually jump into some of these experiences and play with them, because as you know, VR is really hard to get until you do it.
Right.
I think there's 2 sides. I would love to see agencies and brands adopting, like I love that you're showing spatial. I think
it's a useful one to jump people in for the first time, because you get to get a sense of presence together. You get to actually work on things together. It feels enough like an office that you can do Post-it notes or drawings, and the same modalities of collaboration that we're used to are still available to us, which for many VR worlds, that's not the case. It can be very cumbersome to do things together, and then that turns people off of the shared experience. But spatial, because it has both VR or like a 2D desktop version, the headset doesn't have to be the barrier, right? It's accessible for everyone, but it's also immersive if you choose to make it so, which can make it extremely powerful. Now, spatial is only good for really small groups. And this is, for those of you who haven't used spatial before, spatial, you can design your photorealistic avatar based on your own photographs. So it is a representation of you. You can use a headset or not. It is somewhat easier to do what they're describing here in headset, like in terms of drawing or other types of things you would do in a conference room together. But it is almost like a conference room, right? It is like you're going to fit this number of people in your room to do something together. It's not an event space. It's more of a meeting space or a collaboration space.
But it could also be used for presentation. So, I also have a startup, extended reality expeditions and exploration. And, when we first demoed spatial beginning of lockdown as one of our collaboration tools, because my team is very distributed, multiple time zones, and we looked at it, we thought, well, maybe we wouldn't work in here as much as we would present to other people. So what's a really, really great way to get people up to speed with what we're doing is to bring them into our space that's branded and be able to, with no distractions, talk to them and walk them through what our vision is in an immersive environment. Just felt so much more compelling than sending them a deck.
Right.
Yeah. So we really loved it for that too. Yeah.
And so you used Spatial for that. What other platforms did you find useful in your early sort of iterative work in this space this year?
So Spatial was one that we definitely tested, and we probably need to get back into it and use it. And that was pre them bringing out their like fully supported Quest platform as well. So I think there's a few more little bells and whistles in it now, I think, that would make it a bit more interesting. We did out, oh, now I'm going to forget names, which I feel really bad about. There was one that we tried out that was more for education. It's an Irish company, an Irish startup, and they have like lecture rooms and things that you can work in as well. I did come across Roomy, but have not used it yet, and I've heard it's fantastic.
This is one that is good for education. The other one I've enjoyed besides this would be Engage, which has pivoted to more of an enterprise use case. But Engage started out in VR education for simulations as well. I'm curious what other education platforms you've seen to be useful. But in education especially, we've seen there's either the looking for something like a vFairs or a Virtway, like being able to do your science fair in a virtual space, for example, or there is the, the college fair to go and do recruiting and those kinds of activities for the high schoolers. But then there's another sort of aspect to the educational use case, which is just social. And for that, we've seen a pretty wide variety of choices, including using, for example, VR chat. Which has been also used for concerts and a couple of other types of things, but we're seeing now even teachers jumping in and using VR chat as well. So
how good is that for an educational sense? Like, is it, I know that there's some concerns just around VR chat in general, for younger audiences, and that it can be a little rogue with some of the other folks that are on there. But how are people reacting to that then? Is it easy to like lock down certain rooms and make sure
you can control some things, but you're certainly, it's like the Wild West, like any other web experience, right? So that's where typically you'll see groups going to hubs for more control, especially for something that's going to work appropriately for education, because you can't do too many things that are going to get you in trouble in hubs. The other version that many people have stuck with is doing that in alt space, because the terms and conditions, they use the TOS for alt space requires you to stay sort of within a PG-13. You're not going to do anything that's going to scandalize young people if you're in alt space typically. So this affected the Burning Man events, for example, because some of those Burning Man events were designed for adults, and then they needed to not be designed for adults pretty quickly. But overall, alt space is a generally family-friendly environment. And so it is being used for some educational purposes as well.
And they just redid their avatars, didn't they?
They did. And a few other tools are also redoing their avatars for different use cases, right? So AltSpace made them a little bit more adaptable. They've added a hijab, for example, and other types of headwear and other types of things to make it more inclusive as well. Other tools that are doing more inclusive avatars include hubs, Mozilla hubs. You can upload anything you want. I just talked to the team at Virtway Events, which is based in Italy and Spain, but they're all over the world. And Virtway has been working on multi-gender, not forcing a binary gender choice, which I very much appreciate. We don't see a lot of platforms that number one, give a wide variety of skin color choices, sort of beyond a small number, and gender, and having capacity to sort of embody yourself in a more realistic way. That dysphoria definitely keeps some people from engaging in these VR environments. Conversely, that's why other worlds like Sansar, Second Life, where you have a lot of avatar adaptability, VR chat as well. You can be anything you want in VR chat. So it does lend itself to this sort of wild, creative, artistic capacity and flow. So I don't know which tools you're gravitating toward right now, and maybe if you have some of your favorite sort of platforms, but this is VR chat. I'm just going to show a little bit of what some of these tools look like very quickly. This is a friend of ours who is DJing, and she's DJing in a number of different worlds, but you can see what it looks like in sort of an early blockish kind of, she DJs in the wave and in alt space and as well. So being able to go and even DJ across multiple different worlds. Whereas this is actually a photo from one of my virtual spaces, one of my first virtual spaces in 2005. So if you can imagine, spending
in 2005
years. Yeah. I was leading social virtual spaces in Second Life, creating these social impact spaces, but also a space for meditation, a drum circle, places for collaboration, places to talk about difficult issues like genocide and refugee and immigration. We built a number of social impact campaigns in virtual spaces, especially between 2005 and 2012 as part of the what became the nonprofit commons in Second Life. So some of this field has been around for ages, but the engagement numbers tend to still be small, right? Like these are niche events for generally small groups of people. We've only seen in the last year virtual events become like Travis Scott and Fortnite kind of giant events, right? Or even what Janelle Monáe did this week.
I just saw that. Yeah, I missed the actual event, but I watched the full live stream, and it was really quite fabulous.
Right.
Yeah, in Sanctum, right? They called it Sanctum, right?
Right.
And that was really impressive. I think the most impressive one I saw recently was The Weeknd. It's who using the wave and then broadcasting through TikTok, and I just found the actual graphics so breathtaking. It's not normally something that I would watch. It's not exactly my genre of music and things, but with the visuals, it was spellbinding. Like if you haven't watched it, go on YouTube and the whole live feed is there. And the fact that it was interactive. So it's actually funny because since the beginning of lockdown, I've seen a spike in VR game worlds and engines getting additional press, getting additional investment, getting additional interaction, but they're not using VR as much as they're using 2D platforms to broadcast and also to interact. I mean, they're using VR, but I mean, more people are seeing it in 2D platforms. So I am curious whether this time that's going to bring more people to VR,
right?
Or whether it's going to create this new, habit of jumping into these things on your phone or on your desktop as well. But I mean, if you look at it, like watching the Janelle Monáe concert, and that whole experience, I just wanted to be there.
Right.
I wanted to be dancing there while the other people were dancing there.
Right. And the limitations of VR spaces means you end up with about 20 people in the space itself. And then everyone else is in YouTube on a machinima experience. Right. Yeah. And that lends itself to this sort of layers of interactivity and designing for layers of interactivity. So HBO, for example, designed a cohort, a group of people who represented their audience for Lovecraft Country and engaged them and brought them into the VR experiences via VR chat. What we're seeing here is Meet in VR in the Vario headset. And that was a fascinating look at the future of mixed reality collaboration, which we're seeing from now 5 or 6 different toolkits, right? Meet in VR. Certainly the spatial folks are doing a lot of this sort of mixed reality collaboration. So for those of you who haven't spent a lot of time in VR, mixed reality collaboration might use any of the headsets that give you a pass-through camera. So the HoloLens and the Magic Leap and what we call XR headsets do this. Some types of smart glasses do this. And some types of VR headsets now also have a pass-through camera capacity. So you're seeing the real world layered with your virtual experience. And what that does is gives you a sense of being able to combine the presence of what you're doing in your physical space with the others that you're collaborating with, so that you can create that sense of being in a shared space, even if you're all at home working in your headsets. Did I describe that pretty well, Michelle, in terms of how we, I don't know if there's something you would like to add to how we design for collaboration in terms of bringing these events together?
Well, I think it's kind of funny with the pass-through side of things, because it's something that, I mean, like, rest in peace, Samsung Gear VR, but it was such an amazing platform because we could do so many of the things that we're doing now. We were able to use the camera in the Samsung Gear VR. It was an older headset that allowed you to pop your phone into like like Google Cardboard style headset. It was called a Gear VR. If there's anyone out there who hasn't come across one, who's maybe joined the VR world in the last couple of years, since it's been sunset. But I think that the pass-through side of things is incredibly interesting because it means that the headset can be worn maybe for a little bit longer. It's less that you're going into a closed space and more that you're opening up your space for others. And I think there's something really interesting in that, especially for collaboration. I think that in designing for collaboration, you really do have to have, at least initially, people as, well, I wrote it down on my whiteboard before. What did I write? People as like ambassadors and guides. So, you know, getting a couple of people to get really familiar with the platform and then setting up the experience, and then using those couple of people who set it up and played with it initially as guides to spur people on and to encourage them during the gameplay for others. So I always like to have somebody as a guide, you know, somebody, and we do that in virtual events as well. We always make sure that there's somebody there making sure people understand that we're moving to another room now, or that, hey, if you didn't know how to interact, did you know that you can do this, and showing people how to actually use things. I think that's really important because I think there's a lot we can miss when we just get into the experience ourselves. So, yeah.
Well, speaking of missing things, we always have technical difficulties when we're trying to do these sorts of things. And often we're combining things like a real-time live stream with virtual collaboration tools. And just now, as I was trying to bring up a tool to show you, my browser crashed, right?
I saw that and I just kept talking because I wasn't sure if it was me or not.
No, you're perfect. You were perfect.
Cool.
But
Cool.
These sorts of things happen all the time in virtual events, even on a robust gaming computer, where we're trying to do almost too much, right? We're trying to maybe be in a design program while also sharing 1, 2, or 3 interfaces while streaming out to the world. And when you're trying to do all of those things at once, sometimes our hardware doesn't even keep up, much less our bandwidth and the signal that we need to use to make this collaboration possible. So if we're talking about constraints in designing virtual events, it's often constraints of bandwidth, right? So if you have participants who are in low bandwidth areas, they might need an only mobile version or something that is very lightweight on their local systems, right? And so that might be the tool that says, okay, let's go to Mozilla Hubs because it's going to run on a mobile device. If, for example, you know, everyone is not necessarily on VR devices. You and I both design quite a bit of these sort of hybrid events where VR might be the preferred method of engagement, but many people choose not to for their own reasons. And we should probably speak a little bit to which platforms support hybrid experiences in terms of not necessarily having to do the experience in VR. Right. Yeah. So going anywhere. What are some of the tools and platforms you tend to recommend if that's the need in the use case?
So we actually have Vision. I mentioned them at the very beginning. They're the VR company that I rep out of Spain. They actually have a platform called Broadcaster. So like VR broadcaster. And they've been using it now for the last couple of years. It's broadcaster.pro. They don't update their website very often. Hey guys, but they've been using it extensively. So it started off as just a live broadcasting platform, and it was really great because it could support 2D. So there's something to be said for being in a 3D environment and having a headset on, but watching maybe 2D video that you have that's existing. Why would you do that? to have somebody's undivided attention, or to be able to, watch existing materials together and be able to critique them. This could be really good for reviews, for example, or so that you don't have to convert all of your content, or so that you can go VR initially and set a roadmap for everything to be more immersive, 3D or 360. It could also support 180 and 360. So just having these platforms that are really, really easy and accessible and can work with existing content that you have as well, I think is a really good step, because people have this slight, oh God, I have to recreate absolutely everything that I have. It's just broadcaster. So VR, like VR broadcaster, mashing the two words together, but it's broadcaster. I know. It's a fun one to say, broadcaster.
Let's try that one. Is that right?
That's it.
All right.
Yeah, but they've really, brought that forward now to integrate social feeds, to integrate multiplayer, things like that. So I think that's really fabulous. But the thing is, it's always been web compatible. And that was really, really important to them, because they were also working with some quite, budgetarily challenged clients in Europe. I think the great thing that we see coming out of Europe, the great thing we see coming out of Latin America, is that a lot of the innovation has to happen on a shoestring budget. And so a lot of those markets are maybe a little bit better than the US at being nimble and starting small and seeing how things go, because they might have $5,000 to do something versus, $500,000. And so Broadcaster was web compatible from day one, meaning that you could broadcast a session and have a three-dimensional space on your desktop computer. And I think that's, very much in line with where all of these platforms have gone now. VR chat, Hubs, I think, is fantastic at that. I'm also a huge Mozilla fan. I think they have a lot of integrity in the market, and I love them for that. And also coming from a web dev background, we were always Mozilla folks when we're doing web dev. So I really, really appreciate the fact that it's multi-platform. I'd like
it is
more
fantastic for if you need to build something bespoke for your client where you have a relatively short period of time, you don't necessarily have Unity or Unreal talent to tap into to develop that experience. So many VR experiences, even in places like VR chat, are developed using Pro Game Engine, usually Unity or Unreal. But Hubs has its own sort of mini building tool called Spoke. And Spoke is open source and relatively easy to get into, so that you can place your own objects. You can bring in objects from your Google Poly and other types of like Sketchfab tools like that. So I have found Spoke can be very useful for clients that need to be able to prototype something relatively quickly, maybe create a personalized branded experience zone, or something even just informal for their meetup or their group. And so we're seeing more and more meetups this year that can't happen for one reason or another, now moving into both Hubs. And I would say the other space we're seeing a lot of that happen is in alt space. And so there is a lot of community, right? So biohacking, communities for meditation, for queer communities, folks who are educators. This has been growing in terms of niche community engagement, right? Not necessarily branded community engagement, right? These are very much community-driven activities. So if you have nonprofit organizations that are looking to do something new, obviously Second Life has been around for 15 years or more in that space. But there are these other spaces that you can create your own domain. It gives you your own URL, right? So in Hubs, for example, you're generating a URL that you can then share with your community and then make it your, Friday game room. Or whatever it is where your volunteers are going to meet on a weekly basis. Anything that you need in terms of community engagement can live in these spaces.
Yeah, and I think what having things in person, like Alt Space, so doing things in VR, being there in person, meaning with other people, and you can actually see them and feel their presence. Right. It keeps people a little bit more accountable as well. So I think with Zooms, you can slack off, you can have your camera off, all of that sort of stuff. We've even seen, over the last few months, a lot of the social activities that people started to do at the beginning of lockdown, all the Zoom calls that we do with our family and friends, even those have started to tail off a little bit, and people are wanting to do more activities together remotely.
Right.
So that is an absolute behavioral trend, which is why some of these virtual concerts and things have become so popular, because people can see and feel others there with them. Or why co-viewing has just taken off in leaps and bounds. Co-viewing meaning, being able to watch a Netflix show with somebody else, right? Like with your mum or with one of your friends, even though they're on the other side of the country. And I think that in-person element is really vital to keep these experiences moving forward. And I think that we also need to adopt a lot of these post whatever lockdown we come out of and whatever this scenario looks like in the long term. And I really hope a lot of these are here to stay, because it is a lot more efficient and a lot more environmentally friendly and a lot more time effective for me to jump into a headset and actually, or even just a 3D space on my desktop with somebody. Then to go visit with them in person.
And a lot of people cannot do the 3D. So if you need a 2D solution, if the VR and the 3D feels like it's too much, there are dozens of platforms in the 2D space. This is Crowdcast. Crowdcast is one of many that do a mix of multicasting with this sort of online tour. Right. So if you're trying to create an online event with a light version of engagement, this can be very useful. It doesn't require a lot technically out of the users. And then there are these other types of hybrid solutions that are coming up. I'm going to show you one. And honestly, I don't think we can see much of it here. So what I'm going to do is show you a quick video. So I produced a live art event with a number of artists in, I want to say 4 continents a couple of weeks ago. This was for an art show called Edge Cut. And so I'm going to show you a little bit of a tool called Nowhere. And Nowhere is built in A-frame. So it's an immersive 3D space, but instead of avatars, you are in your video, what they call a nonagon, a nine-sided video window. And so you're going to see a little bit of what that engagement looks like. I'm going to show you 2 quick videos. Oh, cute. Great music, by the way. It's original. Oh, this is cracking me up. I love it. That looks terrific. So in the first video, all of those little black circles that you see speaking are people, and we're going to see what those video screens look like in this clip. So each user in those rooms, instead of having an avatar, just comes in sort of like you would in Zoom, right? Your mic and your camera are your embodiment. And so you are then able to be in an embodied space, but as yourself, not as an avatar. And that creates a different type of play. So this art show, what we did is had multiple rooms with different themes. So there was a breath room, a rave, a game room, and the game room was interactive media games that we could play in person. And then there was a stage that included interactive theater. So in some cases, theater groups were live streaming their performances for audiences that were in the virtual space. And this is something we're seeing more and more of, both in places like Hubs, Altspace, VR Chat, as well as in this tool. Nowhere is the name of this tool, and it's being built in Brooklyn right now. I don't know what other types of platforms you're seeing that are beneficial for theatrical or other types of performing arts events as well, but we're seeing tremendous interest in how do you open up performing arts collaborations, and that's small scale as well as the larger scale events as well.
Yeah, I think a lot of what my partners do, at least, is a lot of bespoke work, and so it's maybe not the best to be able to. I mean, yes, we make anything from scratch, but I think one of the trends that I've noticed recently is a lot of these guided experiences. So, just as you said, a lot of like live theatre that people are able to actually jump into an experience at set times. And there's something really nice to me, it feels really nice about having a time to actually go and see a play, or a time to actually go and see a theater experience, and making that like I go and buy a ticket to something and I'm actually going to the 9 p.m. session. And I really like that feeling, rather than it just being on demand and me be able to jump into it at any point. So there's been, I think, like an increase in people using escape rooms and things as well. So people going in and doing these multiplayer experiences together, but at certain times. It's not just saying, hey, we can launch this now, let's all get together and play it, but we have to wait until 9 p.m. to go in because that's our slot. So I really like that as well, because it's a good hybrid of like a real world experience and an online experience. Makes it feel a bit more exclusive. I really like the idea of a space having a lot of different areas. That nowhere tool is really interesting. I'd be curious, have you noticed in the events that you've done, or have you been able to track how different users navigate that space? Like, are there sort of types that you're seeing? Is there the user who comes in and checks everything out a little bit and then figures out where they want to be? Or are there people who, just come in and they go straight to that one space that they want to be in? I'm just wondering if we're starting to see some analytics, some data behind how people react to these experiences as well.
I think we're also seeing we're starting to see people coming to us with a sense of their platform already picked before they come, because they've heard something as well, right? So there's layers of expectation. They saw The Weekend, and so they want to do something in the wave, even if it's maybe not what's right for their type of event. Or maybe they saw something at Burning Man that they want to do in a wholly different environment. And just because interactivity works in one world doesn't mean it's going to work in a different space in a different way, right? And so generally we're seeing that people have this sort of wide open stance in terms of like, I don't know the best way to do this, but I want to do this and this, right? I want everyone singing together, and then we're going to make a music video in the virtual space, and then we're going to do this, right? And so then the question becomes, okay, graphics quality, how many people, what's the, what are the constraints in terms of your publishing, and where does that need to go, and how do you need to produce that? I love that we're seeing more and more of these worlds figure out how to do not just light interactivity. What I think most of what we saw, for example, at the virtual Burning Man was very light interactivity. It's chat. It's
it was being there. It was really about being there,
Right. For those of you who haven't seen, I'm going to show you a very quick video so you can see what I'm talking about.
Dan would love it.
Awesome.
So there I am with my art car and my friends from real life spinning lightning staffs, right? And just having a shared experience together. Not necessarily generative, not creating anything that's, designed for the public, but really just playing. And we do see a fair amount of this, even with adults right now, just sort of exploring and playing and experimenting, both in the arts and theater space, but also in the education, but more renegade spaces too. Just trying to test the boundaries of the media itself. When you think about where we're going and what we can do in these environments, what are you most excited about, Michelle?
I think I'm excited about them becoming persistent. And it's funny that you talk about Second Life and the fact that it is more persistent, but about creating spaces that you can go in and out of as needed in a more seamless way. Because I really see, okay, so Lisa Padilla, I think we all know her.
Mm-hmm.
She is a phenomenal artist who has really just taken off in Google Tilt Brush and has created some of the most impressive art that I have seen, immersive art. And when I see her work, and when I hear about her process and the fact that she was, a traditional in real life medium artist, physical medium artist who was taken to Tilt Brush, I just think of all my creator friends. I think of all of my sculptor friends and painter friends, and even just some of my, copywriter and creator friends from the ad industry. And I think if they just tried this approach, I'm sure that not all of them, but I'm sure that many of them would go, holy crap, I can do something that I seriously couldn't do in the real world before, and would just understand the power of the medium. But then I want them to be able to sort of consistently play in those spaces. So I have a vision where a lot of creative industries, designers, user experience folks, agency creatives, place and space makers and experiential production, event production, retail, are just starting to use these tools naturally for their brainstorming and ideation process. Because right now we've got a real big problem in the advertising industry where, well, it's not a problem, we have a challenge in the advertising industry where creatives get coupled. So a copywriter and art director always get coupled. They're not in the same room right now, or a director and their producer, or a director and their editor. So I think there's a lot of artistic partnerships that are maybe struggling a little bit right now. And I just see VR, even if they're just able to sit there and talk to each other, right? Like just what you showed, even if there's just minor interaction that they're able to do with each other, the fact that they could actually sit in the same space and be with each other. And then the fact that they could be in that space and create together, I just think is phenomenal. I want to see more people using it like that. Not necessarily to build the final product, just to ideate, just to be able to say, I'm thinking of this, and then we would grab this and throw it and be able to walk around a room and actually just map out these experiences. Like I can imagine for choreography and for theater and stage design, for so many things, how cool it would be, how interesting. Yeah.
And we're seeing these tools now being used for production design on TV shows. For example, a friend of mine who is a production designer, I taught her how to use the new iPad to do her scans. So she's basically getting a great scan ahead of time for her location planning, and then able to collaborate remotely with the rest of the team so that they can get everything in the production design process done remotely before they ever step on set, which is amazing. It wasn't even, reasonably doable 2 years ago, but now all the tools are in our hands. Same with what we're seeing here. This is the No Proscenium immersive for indoor, including the sort of kids and theater. So these are the live experiences in VR, and there are so many. I was shocked. I was like, how many different multi-platform VR games can there be around the country? There's a ton. And many of them are being designed by theater groups, as well as these sort of, as you mentioned, in some cases, multi-sector collaborations or brand partnerships or other types of new types of partnerships that we didn't necessarily see happening 2 years ago. Like we're used to seeing immersive experiences in theme parks or in LBEs, in branded entertainment, it's known as, right? But this has sort of opened it up this year to say, okay, you want to try something new in gamified play or in, maybe branded stories with AR that connect to people at home, right? There's so many options for combining these media as well. So,
and I can understand that it might make some people a little trepidatious, because you're basically opening up your brand world to anybody and any interaction, and it's the sort of environment that you can't completely predefine. You really can't. And nor do I think that you'd want to. Like, I really like a lot of these experiences because people can enter them and then you see how people act. Like as a person who's done a lot of research and a lot of UX design in the past, I find them fascinating because I just get in there and watch people and see what they do, and also read an enormous amount of comments about, I'm in a lot of different Oculus communities, for example, to see how, you know, a normal family in the middle of the country is using their Quest that they bought, and what people are recommending to people as well in terms of the experiences and what they can be doing with them. Yeah, I think that it's really exciting for me because people are getting in there and not just clicking on the 5 different options they have, but they're in there in full body and they're allowed to say things and move and look at stuff. And you can track all of that. I know that sounds a little bit scary, but from a researcher point of view, you get to see how people actually act and what they gravitate toward. And it's so fascinating. But yeah, I can understand it would be a little scary for some brands.
So you hit on something. Now I'm an HTC user, so I've been in the Engage tool and some of the other social VR tools, but I haven't spent a lot of time in Oculus and Facebook Horizon and venues and in the Facebook social world. Where do you see people gravitating to have meaningful social experiences in the Oculus ecosystem?
So it's really funny, but a lot of what I'm seeing in these groups that I'm in are calls for people finding buddies to go adventuring with. So in a lot of the Quest communities, because so many people have been buying the headsets and now it's just exploding with Quest 2, you find a lot of posts of people saying, hey, here's my username. I would love to get something regular. You know, I go and I play this particular game, but I'm also open to anything. Who wants to come journey with me? Who wants to come play with me? So there are straight up open calls for strangers to just come play with each other. And it's really like heartwarming, also a little bit scary potentially sometimes. It depends on who's on these platforms, but it just feels like people want to connect. And it's such a great place to do it. And it feels a lot more personal. So I'm seeing a lot of that. I'm also seeing just a ton of VR fitness. So many people are buying these headsets, these ecosystems now for fitness, which is really surprising to me, actually. Maybe because I'm a really sweaty person, and even just having my headset on for a little while, I'm like, get it off. It's kind of clammy. So the thought of actually like doing a whole workout class in it, I'm like, I don't stay in things for very long unless it's collaboration because I'm moving pretty slowly. So yeah, fitness and just people have a real desire to connect with others and play with others. And so in terms of, you know, will the sort of proverbial, you know, metaverse as depicted in Ready Player One and things like that happen? Heck yes, because out there we can see that people get a taste of this and then all they want to do is connect with other people and play. It's just human behavior. And I think the new ecosystems are making it more possible now, whereas maybe 10, 20 years ago, some of the, you know, VR 1.0, 2.0 stuff, maybe it wasn't as possible, certainly not as accessible. Yeah.
Right. And it's also accessible for partnerships as well, because you can you can do things that weren't possible in terms of getting new types of groups together, right? So brands that might have been risk averse in the past, kind of opening themselves up to new types of interactivity, or maybe choosing to partner with a more independent outfit as well.
Yes.
I don't know how much of that you're seeing, but I'm really excited about some of where I'm seeing that work, especially I would say in education, also in storytelling. For those of you who don't know about Kai XR, this is an amazing platform to find VR content for kids in education. So if you're looking for the virtual experiences that are going to be safe for your kids, this is like field trips in VR and all different types of things where you can go and have an interview with a famous person, you know, get behind the scenes and really get to meet how these experiences are created. What I love about Kai is it was, you know, funded in partnership with lots of our friends at Mozilla and others. But this has been mostly crowdfunded. They just raised their first round. It is a team led by Kai, who's an amazing woman of color in leadership in our field. And what we're seeing is the engagement is through the roof on this content. So in terms of making it much easier for kids to find content, I mean, you can see the kinds of things like a whole deep dive into CRISPR. You can replace much of what was missing in the educational environment this year if you have access to a VR headset. Even if you have to borrow one for a while, this is a great place to start if you've got kids and you're looking for safer ways to engage with them together.
Yeah, and you showed me this last week and I was blown away. It's also really, really in line with what we're doing in our sort of like real world exploration and expeditions as well. Startup I have, Voyager. And so I'm going to reach out to Kai for sure and the team, because they're also here in Oakland, which is great. Oakland, right, where I am now. And so I'm curious though, where do you think this works that maybe Google Expeditions doesn't? Because Google Expeditions were pretty like first out of the gate.
Right.
And, you know, they had a million kids having had used their platform, you know, 2 years ago or something, or maybe a year and a half ago, they reached the million kid mark. And I think it's great, but I also think it's not as interactive as it could be. And what really strikes me about Kai is that you can get into these environments and also play. You're not just following along, which I think is really important.
Now, with Google Expeditions, that was specific to VR and AR tours, correct?
Yeah. So there are a lot of content creators out there in the world, you know, Great Barrier Reef or pyramids or all of these amazing locations around the world. And they could submit their content to the Google Expeditions platform and it would then be able to be pulled down by classrooms around the world. Yeah, this crazy spreadsheet of all of these expeditions.
This is the problem. It's a crazy spreadsheet, right?
Yeah,
like there's no reason for Google to be publishing crazy spreadsheets of content when we could have, you know, like a Netflix style or anything else that's actually, you know, searchable and viewable. This is a mess in terms of UX, right? And, you know,
a huge amount of stuff. I don't know how you would even stay on top of what came out. I mean, I'm assuming that they have email newsletter lists and things for teachers, but yeah,
right.
But this is often what I see with Google. Sorry, Google. But I see them come up with great new initiatives, support them, and then just where do they go, right? What's the next step?
And then they kill the product before it's finally got its root. Yeah. So
like I loved Daydream. I thought I still have a Daydream in that cupboard over there. Daydream is a really great headset. So was Gear VR. It's kind of like sad that these things have fallen by the wayside. But yeah, and even Google Cardboard. But I mean, it's more Daydream that they stopped supporting. But I'd like to know where they're taking it next. And yeah, there's a huge amount of content out there. Kids love it. I was at AT&T Shape last year. It's a great conference that happens at Warner Brothers Studios in LA every year. It's free. And the great thing about it is a lot of families go. So you go there and there's actual people because they get to go to the Warner Brothers lot. And there's all of these cool pop-ups. So last year Magic Leap was everywhere, but Felix and Paul were there. The great VR studio, and they had an experience that was shot on the International Space Station. So you could go into this little viewing trailer and watch a trailer for their new experiences coming out. And there was a girl and her dad, a young girl, maybe 8-10 years old, behind me, and her dad, and they were chatting, and I sort of turned around and asked some questions, you know, because she was saying that she'd done some Google Expeditions in the classroom. Her dad's like, "Oh, really? Have you?" So I turned around and I said, "Well, what have you done, and did you like it?" You know, and she thought it was amazing. She'd done some underwater ones and places she just couldn't go otherwise. And I thought it was really interesting.
This is amazing. Yeah. And exactly why I got into building virtual experiences, because you can make places that people cannot get to otherwise. Yep. And that's extremely compelling, whether that's a social impact campaign around a refugee camp and having that experience of connection with people who are in a very different situation than you are, or going to the bottom of the sea, out to outer space. Generally, the VR experiences that take you to places you can't get to otherwise are the most popular. And that's a great place for producers to start in terms of creating new types of experiences too. Because if you can sort of uncork the magic a little bit for people and invite them into a place, especially if it's a sense of magic or wonder or mystery, that can be a very compelling offering. The story and the invitation need to match the ways to participate so that the expectations match, because otherwise people will get there and feel like let down, or maybe they were hoping for more. But if they get just enough sense of like connection to others, right now we're so hungry for that.
Yeah.
I think that's why, like the virtual Burning Man experiences, where tens of thousands of people were finding each other in like BRC VR, for example. I'm going to show just a quick clip of that because, again, these are very sticky friendships. These are the sorts of things where you're going to see an artist that I met who happens to live in my town, but we became friends because we were hanging out in Altspace at their art.
Transitioning to engineering. Since you're not streaming now, we figured I'd tell you real quick about my idea. You can maybe brew on it if you're interested.
Yeah, I think that was needed. I do think it was needed. I think that so many people were disappointed that it wasn't going to happen this year. There were some people who were still driving out to places and, cool, but dangerous. And that, yeah, I think people really needed that reconnection. They really did. I was away last weekend with a bunch of women who have the Flaming Lotus Girls, a bunch of the people from the Flaming Lotus Girls. They're friends of mine, a couple of them friends of mine that I met a lot of the rest of them. And just that connection that they miss in that year is extreme. I'm not going to miss going to Coachella. I haven't gone to Coachella for like 10 years, but there's certain things I don't really mind that I can't go to see, somebody at the Fox. I feel for the Fox, but I don't, it's okay. I can stomach that. But Burning Man is something different. And so are classrooms. And so there's some experiences that we have to replicate or try and supplicate.
It's almost like we're casting the magic circle everywhere, and then we get to invite people to come in and play with it. So as you're thinking about your process, we're going to wrap up, but if there's any, whether it's questions you want to leave our other creators with, or in terms of your own process, the things that you want others thinking about to create more meaningful or more generative interactive experiences.
Yeah, I don't want people to think of this as a one-off, right? So this is what I've been preaching since I've run my own consultancy for the last 5 years. This is not a gimmick. This isn't a technology that, is going to go away anytime soon. It will evolve. It'll evolve maybe beyond what we recognize it as today, but it's not going to just disappear. Not this time, at least. Not this time. And we can tell that because of its extensive use in enterprise and other areas. So we know that the tech is being buoyed up by a huge amount of investment and value that a lot of enterprise companies are seeing. So that's always when you can tell something's about to tip into like proper consumer adoption. And so I want people to maybe reset their expectations and start with themselves. Mm-hmm. So if an agency or a brand is thinking about doing this, can we chat about how, or with Evo as well, can we chat collectively about what you could do to start adopting some of these technologies and behaviors and features and value from this yourself? So can you maybe switch your weekly brainstorm meeting about something over into this space? Or can you, create a pitch room in Spatial? Right. Can you start to just use it, please, and see what you like and what you don't, and then you can build from there, because then you can start to also voice to your clients and to the rest of your agency about why we need to be doing this. So starting small and actually just starting to use it, because there will be use cases. There are use cases. So you have to start somewhere.
Doesn't hurt to just jump in and try new things. It's okay to take a risk and to experiment, especially in these lightweight social spaces. Yeah. You don't have to go in right away as your sort of brand hat or your organizational hat. You can certainly just come in, play. But the key is to think about not just participation for yourself, but how do you want to start inviting participation from your clients, your customers, your community? And then think about this wide open terrain and say, okay, now if we've got the participation of our 10,000 best and amazing people, what could we do together? Like, if we set our sights on something together, set a goal, generate around that, and then make an event or a campaign or an experience, what could we accomplish? Because we've been in this very sort of shut down emergency crisis management mode of thinking all year long. And most of us have had to do that in order to survive. But now that we've got the tools under our belt, right? Live streaming tools, VR tools, all of these collaboration tools, we can use them effectively to design the future of participatory media, to say we're not going to be passive anymore. We're going to be active makers together in making the world we want to live in. So I'm excited to see what we can create together, Michelle. I love our conversations every time. Michelle, would you just give us a shout out to your website so that those of us who are not necessarily from down under can help us know what tell us about the Antipodean.
Oh yeah, so the Antipodean means something. It's not just a made up crazy word. So my website is theantipodean.us. And an Antipodean is somebody who is from New Zealand or Australia. And I'm from both countries. You're going to have to trust me on that, because every time I tell the story, everyone goes, "Oh, you are from both. Thank you. That's great. Thanks, Evo." Yeah, the Antipodean. And I've been in the US now for just over 11 years. And everyone asks me every day where I come from. I come from New Zealand and Australia. The Antipodes. Yeah.
Perfect.
Yep.
Well, it's been such a pleasure having you here. And if there's any way we get to collaborate, I'm always excited to see how we can solve problems together, whether that's for a brand or an organization. If you have challenges with your own virtual events, I hope that you will certainly look up Michelle's work, both in AR, VR, but also in experience design and in this wide terrain of a field. If you have other questions on virtual events, I'm going to put my handle up here. Hit me up at Playable Agency anytime. You're welcome to send in your questions. Email me, Evo at Playable Agency. We're going to be tackling similar questions regularly in open office hours, so you're welcome to send in your questions ahead of time. Next week, we're going to be tackling more of the economics, both in terms of production, but also in terms of distributing experiences. So the economics of XR next week, I would love to hear your questions on that. And Michelle, thanks again for joining us, and thank you for making the time today. If we have any other questions, where should people just follow up with you at your website?
Yep, at the website, my email is on there as well, Michelle at theantipodean.us, on LinkedIn, Michelle Excell, which is, I should have put my full name up because it rhymes. Yeah, or through Evo. And if there's anything you think that you want to have an extra brain on, always happy to help. Like, we're learning every day, and you've given me a wealth of information, and it's really nice to be able to chat to you and you actually understand the full landscape. Like, that is quite uncommon. Everyone seems to have sort of their preferences or ulterior motives, or they're flogging their own company, which is fair enough, of course. So yeah, just as Playable being this umbrella, you're just a wealth of information. And I think the industry is very lucky to have you. So thank you so much for doing
Michelle.
this.
Thanks so much for joining us today. And we're going to sign off here. And anytime you want to find us, you can hit me up at Playable Agency. Thanks a lot for joining us. Bye.
Bye.